your trauma is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And this is where they start to see, oh my gosh, this isn't my fault. I didn't put these thoughts in my head. I didn't come out of the womb going, oh, I'm so fat today. Nobody does that, right? So where did I learn that? How did I become to believe that I wasn't enough and that I had to change?
You ever found yourself elbow deep in a bag of chips wondering how you got there? Or maybe you've sworn off sweets for the 100th time, only to cave by lunchtime. If that sounds like you, you're not alone. That's why today's episode is a game changer. We're joined by Helen Bennett, a coach who's on a mission to help people break free from the grip of compulsive overeating. Forget the endless cycle of diets and deprivation. Helen's approach dives deep into the emotional and psychological triggers that keep us reaching for more. I'm all about small, sustainable changes that transform lives. Helen's food freedom formula delivers exactly that. A roadmap to eat intuitively, tame stress without food, and set a healthier example for your loved ones. So if you're ready to reclaim control for yourself, settle in for a conversation that's packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Good afternoon, Helen. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Awesome. Great to be here, Joe. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I love your spirit, your personality. I think this is going to be great for people to learn more about. Compulsive eating, emotional eating. I know it's a big topic. We kind of said offline. What inspires you to focus on this topic in general?
Yeah, that's an easy answer, but it could be a very long one, so I'll keep it short. Maybe this is fairly traditional, but I struggled actually. I had my own journey, whatever we want to call this, with compulsive overeating. In fact, I struggled with bulimia for 20 years. So at the age of 16, no, let's go further back. 14 years old, I went on my first really, really restrictive diet. And by 16, I was starting to binge. And in a sort of desperate attempt to mitigate for that, I was over-exercising. And then one day at school, I heard somebody talk about throwing up their food, which horrified me. Please don't ever start if you're listening. But it probably was a week or so before I was desperate enough to do it. And little did I know when I started that I wouldn't be able to stop. It became something that I was just compulsively doing almost after every meal. So it was really chronic. So then how did I get into what I do with overeating and emotional eating? Well, actually, I knew I wanted to be a coach when I was going through my own journey of recovery because I worked with some incredible people and they just were so inspiring. And I thought one day I'm going to help other people too. But I didn't expect to go into helping people with food because I was still on my own journey and I didn't feel ready yet. But as it turned out, that came to me. So my first few clients, I was doing life coaching just to get started. And my first few clients revealed to me in a sort of quiet moment that they were struggling with bulimia. And I was like, oh my God, me too. I had struggled with that. I can help. And so I just shared some of the things that I had used to help me break free of that compulsive eating. Because it's really the binging. Everything else was a way of coping with that. And they were improving. And I thought, okay, this must be the universe sort of telling me it's time. So I started in this really difficult, aggressive category and then moved into what I realized. I had some people reach out saying, oh, I'm not struggling with binge eating. I'm not bulimic, but I'm struggling with overeating. Can you help? And I thought, well, let's give it a try. Let's see if this all works for you too. And it worked like gangbusters and I've never looked back.
Oh, so when you were 14 when this started?
14 when I went on my first diet and then 16 when I was starting to binge eat. And now I can see how the two are so intimately connected, and I'm sure we'll get into that today.
Yeah, of course. So when you're dealing with clients, how does the approach you take with them, maybe methods you are a proponent of, to create more of a sustainability so they don't sort of fall off and go back, revert back?
Because this is I actually love that question. It's so good because you're getting to the heart of it now. So what I've realized, there's all these different components that drive people into overeating, whether it be just a little bit of emotional eating here and there, or whether it's as compulsive or aggressive as something like binge eating disorder and bulimia. And one of them, and the one that I usually work on first, is very restrictive dieting. So most people who reach out to me, even if they just got some like occasional overeating, when we go back in time, we tend to find they've been on a diet, started very young, and then have tried every diet since then, kind of in a desperate attempt to stop the eating. Because of course it makes sense if you feel out of control, then surely if you could just control harder, you would sort out the problem. What we discover, though, in order for these changes to be sustainable, is the commitment that the people that I work with make is the discipline of not trying to overly restrictively control, which is it's a balancing act, because if somebody does have weight they'd like to lose, if decades of overeating has meant weight gain, excess weight gain, then yes, there can come a time where they might feel ready and choose to make some nutritional changes. And we just keep them very gentle, and we're looking out for that body's trauma response, which might send them back in the wrong direction. So we want to do that very, very gently if we get there. For some people, they're loving the journey so much that overeating's come down to such a degree they don't need to make any additional changes. And as I'm sure you know, there's so many other great things we can do, from getting fresh air and exercise and social connection that can all improve that. But I love that question, because the minute somebody goes back into dieting, if they've had a very bad relationship with dieting, it's not everybody, but for a lot of people, diets preceded overeating. And my interpretation of that is the body kind of creates a trauma of being starved and being hyper restricted. And then they get to a point where even if they think, I'll start a diet on Monday, that might prompt overeating. Just the thought of it might create a desire to eat, as if it's going, get it in now, get the food in now. She's going to take us away. She's going to deprive us of something we need for survival. So the way that food freedom, and we can dive into what that means, really works sustainably is by creating a really trust-based, beautiful, in-tune relationship with your body and its needs and its hunger, and not pushing that boundary too far where it'll wake up that binge eating again. But I think just about everybody who tries dieting again, because we get to the point, I think, where we think, oh, I'm so healed now, I can definitely go on that diet. And the next thing you know, yep, it's kicking off again. So I giggle because we've kind of all done it. But I think that's where there might be an analogy with something like alcoholism, as I understand it, which is when we hear alcoholics who say if they have one drink, that'll be it, complete relapse. For people who've chronically dieted, they might experience that same sensation with just as soon as they go back into one diet, it kind of reawakens everything again. But if we do this work right, cut a long story short, if we do this work right, why would you choose to go back there? Because back there it was filled with so much angst and food noise and fear and obsession and guilt and shame that for the most part, if we've created a really beautiful relationship with food, nobody really chooses to kind of aggressively go back in that direction again. And usually the weight's coming off on its own in most cases. So that's nobody really usually chooses to go back in that direction again.
Do you notice like there's a certain type, maybe your clients, maybe just growing up, does it lean more male, female? Do you work with a lot of younger people compared to maybe elderly? Or is it kind of like just affects everyone and anyone?
I think it's affecting everybody and anybody. The people who reach out to me, generally women, I think they relate, and I relate to them beautifully, but I do work with male clients, and it's same. But mostly I do work with youngsters, and I love it when somebody sort of in their 20s reaches out, because we can catch it so early. And their brains are so neuroplastic. They'll change. Yeah. Once they get the new things going, oh man, they just roll and they reverse back so much of the stuff that they've done. And they can just latch onto it so quickly. But most people who reach out to me have been struggling for 10, 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years with overeating, feeling compulsive, feeling out of control. And I'm usually the last resort, if I'm honest. They would rather try a diet in the hopes that it'll work than have to get to a point where they're going, okay, maybe I need to listen to my body again, because that feels really scary. I really honor if anybody's listening thinking, but I don't want to stop dieting and I can't listen to my body, because if I do that, I'll eat even more. The fear is, but if I tune in and I listen, surely I'll just eat out of control even more. I'll eat everything. But that isn't the case when we do this work. So generally people are very reluctant to move in my direction because there's fear. Also, they've done a multitude of diets that haven't worked, so then they feel like they've failed, and this is just going to be another thing that they'll fail. But it is a kind of, maybe even when they get older, they're willing to say, you know what, I don't care if I never lose this weight or I never go on a diet again. I just want to stop the compulsion and the obsession. I'm just desperate. Show me what you got. And hey, if that's what gets them there, then great, because then we get to do the real work that was needed all along.
Absolutely. Is there typically, maybe not all, but some people, are they able to go back to like that point in their life where everything started to sort of fall apart?
It's interesting because it's not a necessity for healing or creating food freedom. It's not a necessity to go back and understand the why and how it all began. But I do include it in the coaching because it's so healing. Because we tend to come into this space feeling out of control, feeling like food's bossing us around. We don't have enough willpower. We're just lazy. We're just greedy. And we're blaming ourselves. Like, well, I'm putting the food in my mouth, so it must be me. And actually, when we root it back far enough in time, we start to see this all usually began 7, 8, 9 years old, maybe slightly later, where they came to believe for one reason or another that they weren't enough, maybe enough in the body that they were in, or, I mean, there's so many not enoughs, not pretty enough, tall enough, thin enough. Oh, it just goes on and on and on. And when they start to realize how those beliefs came about and what led them to start using food, or maybe even the emotions that weren't being nourished or released that they found in a kind of very not conscious but completely understandable way, a way to cope with. And food was one of the ways they were coping with overwhelming emotions. As they start to see all of that, it can be so healing because they no longer need to blame themselves. They still recognize that they did it, and now they're doing the work to do something differently. There's a great saying, I don't know if you've heard it in addiction recovery circles, which is, or maybe it's not addiction, but anyway, it's your trauma is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And this is where they start to see, oh my gosh, this isn't my fault. I didn't put these thoughts in my head. I didn't come out of the womb going, oh, I'm so fat today. Nobody does that, right? So where did I learn that? How did I become to believe that I wasn't enough and that I had to change? And as they start to piece that puzzle together, it can be so freeing because they can take away all that self-blame they've carried for so long about what got them to where they are, while simultaneously realizing they can't get that time back. And it's time to do the work to move them out of that space, to change the thoughts, to emotionally regulate, to, eat in attunement with their hunger and all of those things. So it's a great question because it's not necessary for freedom. You can do all the work and never go back and never get the why. But the why brings people a lot of peace.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, and I probably should have just went into like what the concept of food freedom for people listening, how it helps people break free from these cycles.
Food freedom, the way I decided, so I'll tell you my story because this might be what people resonate with a bit. 2 decades of binge eating and purging, chaos. And I had run a couple of businesses and the second one failed, it closed down. And there was this moment when I was sitting in my bed thinking, I have to put my focus and attention into I have to recover this. It's now or never. I keep building businesses and doing other things and I'm not actually spending time on this. But I tried dieting and calorie counting, anything to control the overeating. And I remember sitting on my bed in the space of going, right, it's time. I've got to make this a priority. And this sort of voice came to my head was like, I just want to eat what I want and stop when I'm full and not think about it in between. And that's really how I define food freedom. And it's often when people really are honest, they just desperately want to just be able to do that. It's like, I just want to breathe without having to think about it, without having to wonder how many breaths I'm taking, what is my rep rate. I just want to be able to do this without worrying about it all day. And luckily for some of us, not everybody, but some of us have a memory of what that used to feel like, where food wasn't a thing. We just lived. We cracked on. Mum made dinner, we ate it, we didn't matter, off you crack. And there's that real longing for that. But I think what happens is we come to believe it's not possible, given all our experiences. So first we say, hey, what does food freedom mean to you? And it's usually some version of that. They want the freedom from all the thinking, the obsessing, the shame, the guilt. They want to be able to just not worry about food. They just wake up and know that they'll eat whatever they're going to eat and it'll be just fine. And they don't want to worry that if they eat something intuitively, inverted commas, that it'll lead to weight gain. So that takes a lot of time to build the trust to see that that's possible. But that's the freedom that we're talking about. It's being able to have chips and chocolates and all the things around you and not have to feel like you have to use force to stop yourself. You either want it or your tummy wants it and you eat it or you don't. And it's easy. And you'll stop when you're full and that's it. And it sounds so easy. But when I heard that voice in my head, I was like, I am not doing that. I am doing everything but that. I'm trying to deny hunger, suppress hunger, prolong hunger. I'm not eating when I'm hungry. And I certainly wasn't stopping when I was full. I was just going way past it.
Yeah. Keep
Now,
going.
that was a
Yeah.
little bit more my trauma response out of control talk in there. But that was an interesting, because when I heard, what did I want? I wanted that freedom. Then I had to think, well, how do I do that? Because I can't calorie count my way to that. That didn't make sense, right? I tried and it
No,
hadn't
no.
worked. Surely if I want that, then I have to start doing more of that. And that's really what began the journey that I went on.
So someone who says, okay, I have hunger pangs, for example, how does your approach connecting people with their hunger pangs? Does that play into your coaching?
It does and it doesn't. So some people come in and they are so disconnected. I would have been one of these. I couldn't tell if I was hungry or full. I had so little connection to those signals. It was so confusing to me. And some people come in like that. Other people come in who quite actually immediately quite good at hearing it, but there's no trust. But the hunger pangs, that's interesting, because the work that we do is, when I start working with someone, it's really about, initially, certainly for the first 4 months, working to keep ourselves in that neutral space so the body's not experiencing that starving. And a hunger pang, when people really get good at this, is quite obvious. It's a bit like overfull or stuffed. You can feel it. A hunger pang tends to be growling and grumbling, and they can start to learn. It might take a bit of trial and error while they're trying to figure this out, but they can start to learn what that is. But it usually comes with a more focused, I got to eat now kind of energy and thinking about food all the time. So there's different ways to figure out if we're hungry from that hunger pang. But our job initially is to try and avoid that at all costs, because if you've come from this overeating background, chances are hunger pangs are right before blowout. So, one of the biggest danger zones I see is when somebody says, they're telling me a story and they go, and then I was starving. And I think, oh, here we go. This is going to end up in a binge. And sure enough, it does, because the body's creating that response. So our job is to help them get better and better at being neutral. Then in time, when they're really good at this, today is actually the perfect example. I woke up today, had a lot on my mind. I've been busy. I did a bit of training. And I'd probably say right now I'm really quite hungry, but because I've done enough of this work, my body's not interpreting that with fear. So yeah, my body might be experiencing a hunger pang in that it's really quite interested in a meal at the moment, but it knows it'll be fed. So there's a real sense of safety and trust that it doesn't have to worry that that is going to be a problem. So in time, you can get very good at being with hunger without experiencing that overwhelming desire to just go crazy the minute food's around.
When you sit down with someone, do you focus first on like mindset, or is it more if I come to you and I sit down with you, like how would we start diving into it from the beginning?
First things first, I always teach what I call skill zero. So my whole way of working as a coach, and I love being a coach as opposed to a therapist because it's really practical, even though we do some deep work. But we look at it all as we've kind of lost the language of being able to hear our hunger and fullness and honor all of that. And it's all messy. Food became messy. And now we've got to build a new language of food freedom again. And it's all sort of skills and drills. So the first skill that I teach everybody is, well, it's not really teach, just recommend. And this is a lifetime practice. It's just the skill of like curious observation, just without judgment. Like, wow, I just completely blew out on that packet of whatever. I'm trying to think
chips
of chips, or cake. And oh, how interesting, instead of going straight to shame. So the first thing we do is try and take all the judgment away and look at ourselves completely again without trying to make any changes yet. I might have somebody a full week just observe what's going on before they try and change anything. Because in that observation of those moments, the mental and everything that's happening in those moments where they're overeating, there's so much good information, because there we're starting to see the mindset or the physical patterns or the lack of sleep or the emotional triggers that are leading into the overeating. So we always start with curious observation, which can be tricky for somebody who's used to being self-critical.
Is that through like journaling in the beginning?
Yes. So what I usually say is in the first 3 days to a week, depending on how long, is have a journal nearby, ideally, although, just 5 minutes at the end of the day works. When you reflect on the day, it can still work. especially what you want to do is look for those moments where it goes from, I'm fine, this is great, into, you press the button. It's basically, screw it, start tomorrow, that moment.
Right.
And in that moment, the things we say to ourselves, what's going on in our body, it's so interesting. You're such a failure, you're never going to make
Yeah.
it, or,
Just
she'll never
negative.
know, she doesn't have to know about this, I can lie to her. There's all of those things that come up, or I couldn't be bothered. And the words they use are so important. And so, when we get into the mindset part, that's where we really want to be working to change all of those, and to test those, and to look into that. But those words have almost always come out of childhood somewhere, but they were never ours. We've learned them, especially the critical stuff. So yeah, it's fascinating. So from there, we go into first step is reconnecting with hunger. And then from that, once they're starting to eat and nourish themselves, because, a nourished body, it's very hard to have good mental acuity or change anything emotional. We've got to try and get the food back in the way the body needs it, and without hunger pangs. And from there, we can do the mindset work and the emotional work on top of that. So skill 0 is sort of like preparation. And then skill 1 is usually what I call tummy check-ins. It's actually starting to listen to our hunger, reconnect with our body again. And then from there, usually the next step is starting to change the mental, the beliefs, the stories that are driving us to eat. Because oftentimes, you nailed it. When we say, I hate myself, that feels totally. And what are we likely to do? If we're a comfort eater, what are we going to do? If we feel we're probably going to overeat.
Well, exactly. Right. Comforting.
Yeah. So then we realize, oh my goodness, these thoughts that I've been thinking are actually triggering the overeating. Okay, well, we've got to start changing those thoughts then. And that opens up a whole nother can of, well, what if it doesn't feel true? And we can certainly get into that. And then the thing that comes after that usually is working on the emotional. What are the emotions that I'm trying to numb, escape, soothe, comfort, suppress with food? And they're all interlinked. You see, we've done the physical, the mental, now we're talking about the emotional, but they're all talking to each other all the time. So in my experience, usually working on that physical, reclaiming that ability to eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full is first. But it isn't always the best thing for the person. Sometimes we straight into the emotional work. Sometimes that's what they needed quickly. But if we're doing something good with the emotions, it'll be affecting the physical and the mental too. They're all talking to each other relentlessly. So it's actually lovely, to know that if we can unburden ourselves of some negative thinking, that will likely lighten our physical load. I love how it all overlaps, even if it's a bit messy and complicated.
Like a symphony, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the mental triggers that a lot of people are struggling with? You said there's not always a point that you go back to. Some people never find or never recall that point where they started to. But do you see a common theme with people that are trying to address these sort of headworms or mental triggers?
Yes. Common theme, if we were going to get it straight to the heart of the onion. So when we take the layer upon layer upon layer down, I am useless, I hate myself, whatever these negative thoughts are. And we just start to take them layer by layer. What we get to is, I'm not enough in some way. And if I'm not enough, then I can't be loved. And even for the people I literally work with people who struggle with memory loss around the time that they started losing control with food, which is interesting. It's almost like the brain's trying to protect them from pain. Another brilliant way of handling it. But usually we see that it's not always parents, but let's call it 95% of the time, they felt they had to change themselves in some way to be enough so that they could be lovable for one or both of their parents. And it can be interesting when it's conflicting. Like one parent might be the feeder, so they felt like they had to take the food in order to experience love, say from mum. Mum's often the feeder, but it's not always. And the other one is the fat shamer, and so they're caught between this horrible, where they've got to receive food as love, but they also can't be too fat because otherwise they'll be rejected. So what happens is we start, all these not enoughs come from this place of trying to figure out, who do I need to be to maintain that relationship? Because as little kiddies, we can't say, bugger you, mum, I'm off.
Of course, no,
cheers,
not
guys.
happening. Yeah.
I'm out. We can't put down those boundaries. We've got to find a way to maintain that relationship, even if it's not a good relationship. And the people that I work with who struggle with food specifically tend to have turned into the good girl, the people pleaser, or the good boy. Get the good grades, say the right thing, be nice, be kind, look after other people. Don't put your own needs first. Don't show too much emotion, or only show the good emotions, not the bad ones, because we can't threaten that relationship. So they tend to come down to that feeling of not enough. And because it started so long ago, and because it's connected with safety, because if we threatened that relationship, we could be very unsafe. And so those beliefs that lie at the heart of this whole thing when it kicked off are very hard to change, because they feel horribly true, because we've believed them for so long. We've told ourselves that story for so long. And to not believe them and to not create a personality around those beliefs, or a way of being around those beliefs, could have actually threatened the very thing we couldn't lose. And it takes a long time for our nervous system to go, oh, it's actually safe to be me, and it's safe to eat this food, or it's safe to say this thing, or it's safe to have this emotion, because I'm an adult now and I don't need my parents anymore. And it takes a while for that nervous system to go, oh, no, we're okay. We can actually do this. We can be more ourselves without experiencing that critical abandonment that we couldn't bear to experience as a child. That went deep.
Yeah, no, it's awful to hear, like I never really thought of that perspective of a kid dealing with conflicting. I'm seeking approval from this side, but I'm getting that back, and seeking approval from that side, but they're shaming me, kind of thing. And just being trapped in the middle, and that just carries into adulthood, and shapes so much of their belief system about themselves, and obviously how they eat, and what that does to their mental and physical state.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah.
You won't believe how many people come in and they say, Helen, I don't really think, I don't really think I should be here. I don't really have any major trauma. I just don't see, we're using that word trauma a lot these days, and that's perfectly fine with me. But what's always interesting is when we dig below the surface, the things they experience would shock and horrify, even if it's maybe not as big as a big T, but still the abuse and the name calling and the shaming, or the bullying at school, and you just think, and you thought you didn't have trauma? What the hell, if I'd been through that? It would have been horrific.
It's still a child, right? Like, it doesn't really matter to the level of what it is, right?
I agree.
Well, when it comes to food, when they start eating, when people are eating, is there areas that you stick to in terms of, let's stick whole foods, or making sure a portion of the plate is this, or again, is it not a one size fits all? Do you kind of bring it back to like basics, or is it more tailored to each person depending on, preferences?
So my entire methodology is helping them connect with their body's true hunger and what the body really wants. And so it's entirely individual, because it's not about what I'm saying they should eat or what's the right thing for them, but actually when we start to listen, I use the word tummy because it's sweet and it's kind of caring, but not everybody resonates that. But let's use it. So one of the first things we train them after skill 0 is what I call a tummy check-in. And I don't know how I stumbled across this, but it works like gangbusters. So it's really about tuning into our tummies, getting our mind out the way, and just trying to cue the tummy in such a way that it'll come back and say, that's what I'd like to eat, and that's exactly how much. So I have a phrasing for it that really works. So we don't just say, what do you want? Hey, Tom, what do you want? Because your tummy's like, I don't know, what are you talking about? It's, what would you like to be really if you could have anything, like private chef available to you right in the instant, what would you eat that would be the perfect thing to just hit the spot and keep you comfortable until whenever your next meal is? And usually we roughly know our day, so we can kind of guess. When we take a moment to actually do that, what is incredible, Joe, and it will blow you away, is, 99% of the people I've ever worked with have come back with this unbelievably balanced, healthful, whole food option. And I've literally said, pizza, you can have whatever you want. You can literally choose anything. There's no judgment. We're in a judgment-free zone, and there's no right or wrong. Our tummies, when we actually key in, mostly want us to eat whole foods. So I don't have to say, you need to eat whole foods. The tummy will keep telling them.
That's amazing.
But I know it is, because I have moments where I think, please let this not go wrong today. And I had once when I did this with a client, and she came back with something that I think we could all sort of define as junk food or something. But even so, I had to believe, because I could hear it was authentic, I could hear it come from the tummy. I had to believe from the work I'd done that that was probably what her body needed in that moment. And we can't know why. And she's gone on to become an absolute badass at all of this, and she's eating beautiful. She's cooking again and whole food meals. But it's not about me saying you need to eat whole foods, or this is when you should eat. It's actually about, when is your body crying out to you to eat or not to eat, and can you be attuned enough to hear what it wants? Because I bet you know this, right, Joe, because you're fit and healthy. If you've just done a big old strength training session or something, right, you're doing a bunch of deadlifts or whatever. I don't know if you do that, but let's assume you do.
I did this morning.
Yeah, there you go. And you did some major loads, right? Later in the afternoon, I'd bet, or even that morning, that you naturally, if we key in, you're like, man, I could kill some salmon, or I really need steak or eggs, and it's just like, and that was actually one of the big ahas I'd had, because I used to be super into CrossFit, and I love CrossFit still. But it's just that awareness that when I'd done a heavy session, that later, maybe if I couldn't even get it, but a day or two later, I'd be craving, red beans or red meat. It was so specific, and I sort of couldn't shake the desire for them. And I think that's what we do, but on a much more quieter and softer scale on a day-to-day basis. It's just listening for our body's requirements. And every now and again, that tummy of ours will say, it's got to be chocolate cake. Now, everybody that comes in usually knows quite a bit about nutrition, because they've tried to find solutions. So they're actually quite well versed in the nutrition, and they're intelligent people. They're not stupid, but they feel a bit out of control. So because they know, I've been told it's bad for me, or I should be eating more of this and less of that, they've already got all that information in their head. So we're trying to do all of this with all those rules. We've got to put down the rules, and every now and again that tummy will say, it's got to be chocolate cake, or it's got to be that thing that's bad. And that's when we've got to be really brave and listen. Because chances are, if we listen, whatever it is that it needed inside that, it'll just hit the spot. And then we have that freedom, that like, okay, I'm satisfied, I'm satiated, I got it, and I move on. The opposite, and I think this is what I see a lot, and maybe you've experienced this, or not you specifically, but any people where we're told, okay, calorie deficit or something of that nature, or like intake more protein. And so we do that because we want to do the right thing. Now we're full. Maybe we've eaten a big old celery because it's low in calories. I don't know, I'm just using examples. Or we've had the protein shake. It wasn't what we really wanted, but now we're full and completely unsatisfied. Do you know what I mean? Mm. It's like eating a big thing of popcorn. You're full. Technically, you're full. Maybe it's even low in calories, but you still want the meal. And that's where it's actually just better to go to what that body was craving in the beginning, hit it on the head, and then, you get that lovely feeling of, I'm good, I'm satisfied. Now I can get on with my day.
Wow, I love that approach. That makes total sense, because that's probably, people are not listening to the cravings. How about when it comes to cooking, like your own meals, versus a lot of people, like they're busy, they're working, here in America, it could be 10 hours a day or more, commutes. They're stopping for takeout. They think it's healthy, but then who knows? Is there an emphasis in your program on making your own meals, versus do you give them the option of maybe they are craving something that's at the store or the restaurant?
So the first 4 months, we wipe all the rules away. If takeout's what they want, they're going to have it, because we're reestablishing that trust where their body's lost that ability to trust them. Then I sort of looking out for a bunch of what I'd call green flags, where they're ready to introduce some gentle nutritional suggestions, and maybe some, gentle weight loss moves in a weight loss direction if they choose. At that point, absolutely. I mean, home cooking, whole foods is a great idea. However, I think to your point, boy, oh boy, we are busy people. And most people come into my coaching practice, they are absolutely chronically exhausted. And one of the hardest things for them to do is find rest. So if we then add, right now it's time to do home cooking, and they feel like they can't achieve it, or they're not hitting it, then they feel guilt, shame, and I'm failing. So we've got to avoid that at all costs. So I usually try and work with them. I mean, at this point, they're feeling a lot more freedom. They're tuning into their body. They're eating more whole foods naturally, and they're wanting them. They're starting to crave them. That's what's so cool about this work. the longer they do it, the more the stuff they thought was bad in the past is stuff they realize they actually don't enjoy as much. And they might get to a point, and this is certainly my story, where you're exhausted, you've had a long day. This is absolutely my story. Actually, this happens regularly. You're sitting with that moment of like, oh, I just want takeaways. But then the thought of the takeaway that you might order, if I think about eating it, I'm like, ugh, I think of my tummy, and my tummy's going, oh no, I'd much rather have something. I mean, it could be a burger, but could we have something a bit nicer or better or healthier? But it's not a word I'd use. It's just going to taste better. And sometimes because that option isn't available or it's hard to get, we actually end up going, oh, screw it, I'll just go and make the meal. You know?
I can get in the car.
Because the dissatisfaction of eating that takeaway is going to be so high. But on the other hand, sometimes I'm working with people who are where work is such a huge part of their life, and there really, really isn't, or family, much time for them to do this cooking. So we've got a couple of options there. They might choose to, and it's a choice, really engineer time in the weekend where they're doing a bit of meal prep, so it's easy. Or here's another great option: working with a friend, whoever who loves cooking and would happily make you 2 or 3 extra meals a week, home cooked from scratch, in alignment with the kind of thing you generally love. Or, and this is what I'd be doing if I was in South Africa. It's not really available here in Spain, but many of us have access to ready chopped veg, which you can just pop in the oven. It takes, that's 5 seconds. You open the packet, you pop it in the oven. It takes 20 minutes to cook, same time as the takeout. Super easy. And these things are so nourishing and so satisfying that we begin to choose them, but also let's make it easy. Whatever we can do to help them get the nutrition that their body's craving, which is generally good, in a way that's easy without shaming them if they're not doing enough home cooking. But the more they do this work, the more they want to home cook because it tastes better, the flavors are better, it's more satisfying. And because that's what we're looking for, they tend to crave it and be ready to put in that extra hour or two, or find the hour, or find somebody to do it for them. Because they want it more, which is great.
Yeah, especially when you start to figure out I didn't even know this spice was something that I enjoyed. Now I'm craving this, right? Because I'm making it. And had I not made this, I would never know. And now now it hopefully works and you stay with it long term.
Yeah. So what I love to do is just help them slowly come up with 10 to 12, what we sort of call core meals, the meals that their tummy generally wants, that works for the family, everybody's winning, deeply satisfying, and are really quick and easy to either prepare or to make on the day, and to generally have those ingredients around. So the willpower isn't about trying to deny ourselves from these other things. It then becomes, can I use my willpower and my discipline to do that shop when I'm tired, to get the ingredients in, to do that bit of meal prep? But it's so much easier to do that when we're not having to fight off cravings and try and be disciplined and not eating those other foods that used to scare us. But it's really tricky. I think we've got to be careful not to shame people who are really busy into like, you should home cook more, when they're clearly just struggling to even get an extra 5 minutes of sleep.
Absolutely. There's definitely options out there for things, and you just find one you like and it shows up and you, like you said, pop them in the oven and you're good to go. It doesn't make you feel shameful, hopefully, because you're able to pick the ingredients, they're sort of pre-approved kind of thing. So maybe that's an option for some people. How about like someone, okay, so they're in your program, they're working with you. Like you said, some people it could be months that they're still on certain steps. Once they're sort of, do they ever sort of graduate from there, or is it best to check in with you once a month, once a quarter?
You're so good, Joe. You're asking great questions. This is great. So, the goal of it is freedom, right? So the goal is to get to the point where they have so much experience and trust under their belts that they can listen, that they can tune in, where there's overeating is fewer and further between, usually only emotionally triggered. After the first, if we're doing our work right, it depends on the person, but let's say 4 to 8 months, they're at a point where they're eating intuitively, they're feeling real peace and freedom, there's so much less food noise, but every now and again life will throw them this boom, and then they just want to eat. And it's generally an emotional trigger that we haven't yet had a chance to fully work with, because it's quite a big one, or we haven't yet had a chance to work with it at all, because it's a really big one that come out of the blue. Life always has the ability to throw us a few curveballs in a 1-year period. So 4 months is where we're making most of the real momentum. And then after that, to answer your question, I wouldn't say there's very few people who I feel at 4 months are just completely graduated. There's usually extra work because of that emotional component. But at that point, what we might do is go down to fewer sessions because they're kind of kicking ass at this point. In some cases, we continue doing weekly, but in other times, we'll go down to fortnightly or even monthly, depending on what we feel is right. But always with the caveat that, hey, if something kicks off, we've been struggling with this for decades in most cases. If something kicks off, it's no problem. It's totally understandable. It just means there's something there for us to work on. And so we sort of leave with an accountability measure in place where we say, hey, if you're even feeling a little bit bingy, or you're feeling like you nearly lost control, or you did, and it felt like it used to, get in touch immediately. Not so that I can shame you and be, Joe, you're broken, babe. We can't fix you.
You're a bad person. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, well, you're one of my failed clients. No, we just go, okay, well, that sucked, but let's use it. Let's learn from it. And so we can figure out what was going on, what drove you to do that, because all that happened is the body's reacting in the only way it knew how in that moment, probably because it had been wired that way multiple times in the past. And it's going to take a few new repetitions of something new before you don't experience that automatic program kicking off. So the automation is trigger hits, usually emotional. Body doesn't know what to do with it, hasn't been trained yet in something new, reaches for food because that's what it always used to do. And it helps until it doesn't. Yeah. And so we just go, okay, well, let's figure out what that was, what was going on. Let's work it. Now we prepare. If it happens again, they're more prepared. And hopefully they get through the next one. And the more they get through, the less the automation occurs. So I used to have just an automatic habit loop if I felt disappointed or I'd let somebody down. I just wanted to eat. Immediately, I'd get the craving to eat. Not hungry, just wanting to eat. Made me feel better. And it took a lot of repetitions of not doing that and finding new tools to deal with that feeling to get to the point where if I disappoint someone or let somebody down, there's not even a thought of food. It's just not there. It's not that I'm having to fight it off. It's just not there. And that's where we want to get people to. So true graduation is we've kind of been tested enough that we're creating a sense of trust where we go, chances are I'll be okay no matter what hits. And that can take time. So for some people, we might keep working together for a bit longer, and it depends on the severity of the emotional eating or the overeating to begin with. But the good news is you do get to a point where I would never say, I'm completely free, never again. I'm aware I'm a human being and there might be something that happens to me or to a loved one that is so emotionally overwhelming that maybe my body still goes, I'll do that thing I used to do. But I've been through so many difficult things in the past 10 years or so, and I've had so many good experiences where I've been through something really hard, and at no point did I think about eating, that I sort of feel that deep sense of, I'm probably good to go. So to answer your question, I don't know that we ever graduate because we've got to be humble enough to know that if something happens, it's not the end of the world, and it just means there's something that needs healing. But when we get enough reps under our belt and we do enough of this work, you do get to the point where you're not worrying and not having to be vigilant. It's just, you get on with your life. And if something happens, you'll reach out for help.
Okay. So what would you say to someone who I can't change this. This is me. I'm just this way. I'll never stop overeating. What would you say to that person?
I love that question because that's usually the big fear that gets in the way, or the headworm, the mental stickiness that gets in the way. Everybody's skeptical. How could you not be? Especially if you've been overeating, how could you feel a sense of trust that you could trust, or even belief that you could actually trust your body when you've seen nothing but out of control and compulsion? For most of us, there's this little whisper inside us that says, this is who I was born to be. I was born to be able to eat with freedom. I was born to be able to breathe freely and eat freely and do all these things without having to double think it and second guess it. And so I think there's a part of us that knows deep down that it's probably true, that you could have it again. And the other thing is, if somebody says, well, I've had clients who've come in who from a baby, the day they were born, their mum was restricting them, not giving them enough food because they were petrified their babies would become overweight. Horrific, but it happens. So they've never actually had the experience of complete freedom around food. They don't even know what that's like. They've just never had it. And then I would say, well, if we think of it like learning a sport or learning a language, I actually think it's kind of like both. It's like learning Spanish and also trying to snatch like how many pounds, you know. It's a very technical thing to learn, and then trying to learn a new language all at the same time. So it's overwhelming at first. But like anything, if it's skills and drills, and if you take a leap of faith in that I might just have the strategy and the skills that can help you create that freedom that you want, then all it is reps. It's just being patient and reps. Because as long as your brain is neuroplastic and it can change, and our brains are, doesn't matter how old we are, then it's just a matter of doing the reps, seeing the little bits of progress, continuing, and keeping at it until it becomes automatic or automagical, as my coach used to say. So, you know, we might think, oh, I'm skeptical. Okay, but if I was to teach you Spanish every day for a year, would you be better or worse at Spanish at the end of the year? I mean, surely you'd be able to speak some, right?
Yeah.
Whether you wanted to learn it or not, you'd be learning it.
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's the same.
Okay, well, how about personally with you? Like, how has your relationship with food and self-confidence and trauma evolved, if I may ask, since you were little and through this day, doing everything you do for others?
It's been a journey. If you told me maybe even 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago, when I was in the heart of this chaos, if you told me it would be possible to be experiencing the freedom that I feel around food, to be able to have crisps and chocolates and things in the kitchen right now, not thinking about it all day, not worrying whether I have to can or can't eat it later. If you told me I wouldn't experience immense compulsion or like that huge vicious urge to eat something when an emotional charge kicked off, that it wouldn't even be there. I always used to think recovery was about just kind of a vigilance and holding on by your fingernails a little bit. Like if you could just be strong enough, then you can keep away. But I never expected that this is possible. And I'm still on that journey. Up until this year, in fact, I have always thought I can never diet again. I wonder if that's true anymore. I wonder if the healing is so deep now that if I really chose to do calorie deficit, if that's what I really wanted, or if somebody said, I'm going to challenge you, Bennett, you know, let's see if you can do this without kicking off those urges. I'm starting to think, is it even possible that I could do it again if I wanted to? Now, I'm not in a desperate desire to diet or lose weight, but I am intrigued by the idea. So it's kind of interesting that the healing's kind of even got to that level. So it's been a huge journey. And the thing about food, if anybody's listening, is if your relationship with food is bad, all it is a sign that something needs work. That was so helpful because when we look at it like that, then every experience negative with food became like a beaming light over the trauma that needed healing, or the self-confidence that wasn't there, or the headworms, the mental state that was kicking off. And it's forced me to do this work where over the years, this benchmark of kind of happiness and self-confidence is just slowly raised. And I think I'll always be on that journey of healing the original wound of I'm not enough and therefore I won't be loved. I think that is the journey that we're all on as human beings. And food just became the indicator that continues to keep guiding me. You know, if I have a moment, I'm a human being, and sometimes I still reach out for a bit of this and that in a moment of sadness or anxiety, but that's choice. It's not compulsion. And it's so relaxed. And I don't really eat for sadness or loneliness or anything like that anymore. But sometimes in a space of anxiety, I find it can be really helpful to have a good meal. Now, you could call that emotional eating, but I call it like helping me get on with my day.
Positive emotion, yeah.
Very different, right? It's totally different to what it was. So yeah, this work with food continues to help me even dial in, where's that anxiety coming from? What is it I'm telling myself that's creating such a high heart rate and worry and fear? Where can I do the work to regulate that now? So I'm still on that journey. So yeah, it's quite a change, Joe, from the Helen Bennett you would have met, you know, at the age of 15 or 16, I tell you. She was in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, no, I can imagine. I think, and for people listening, what the general consensus I'm getting from you is, yes, it's a lifelong journey, but people who put in the time, put in the work, and just dedicate themselves to not blaming themselves, but just sort of reestablishing this relationship they have with food. When people want to say, okay, I like me personally, I think everything you're saying is amazing. How would someone get started working with you if they wanted to connect with you after listening to this?
If somebody wants to connect with me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Coach Helen Bennett. That name can be difficult to spell, so you can go to foodfreedomfoundations.com and that'll get you straight to me.
And then are you working with people throughout the globe, or is it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's incredible. I mean, this definitely moves across all cultures and everything. But yeah, predominantly in the UK. I have my clients there, but I definitely have clients in Australia, South Africa, and the States as well. So yeah, anywhere in the globe, really. It's just about getting our time zones correct, eh, Joe?
Of course. Yeah, we know
It's
that
early for
too
you
well.
and late for me. So, but we always make a plan.
Of course. So I'll make sure that that's all in the notes here for people to reach out to you directly to work with you. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to get to know you. I could talk with you all day.
Joe, thank you so much. And your questions were phenomenal. And, I love your podcast as well. And I love the work that you're doing because ultimately we're all here to help people experience better health and happiness and freedom. And it's just so cool to have met you and to have done this with you. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks again, Helen. Great to meet you.